Please welcome Scott Schiller.
Too kind, too kind. Thank you, sir. So it's funny, I work at Flickr. I enjoy photography. I've been doing this for like 7 years, and I'm here talking about audio. But audio is also a big interest for me. The whole multimedia thing, just photos, video, audio, music, web, it's all really good stuff. The display here is going to be a little bit crunched, so some things I show might show a little bit off when I'm showing circles later. But hopefully the webcast will be better. So web audio, HTML5 and Flash in a tree. Why do I say in a tree? Because I believe they can get along. Because I don't think it has to be just one or just the other. So who am I? Well, I'm Scott Schiller. As explained, I build front-end things at Flickr. I take photos. I like sound. I like code. I like records. I like DJing. And I like fun web experiments. So we're seeing the squishy effects here, but whatever. This is something I built called the Wheels of Steel, which I'll be demoing later if we have time. And more recently, I've been working on recreating an old arcade game. It's kind of an interesting performance test and also uses sound. So let's talk about audio, which I came here to speak about. Let's go back to the past. So we're going to talk about where we used to be with audio stuff. So, I don't know, 13 years ago, we had this BG sound tag. So you would stick this element into your page, and it was an IE only thing. You'd say BG sound source equals some MIDI file, probably Xfiles MIDI file. Auto start true, loop 1,000 times, and then you get background audio playing in IE only with no interface to control it. Exactly what every web user wants. So we move forward a little bit. More recently, we're seeing object and embed, which is just the generic browser way of saying put some element into the page. In IE, they're using object tags, so you just say, here's a WAV file, the data itself, the URL. The browser then determines what plugin to use to render or play that content. So in this case, if you're on IE, it's probably Windows Media Player. Embed is Netscape. It's a Mozilla thing that everyone else has adopted. So of course, then you might get a media player plugin like QuickTime, which might pick up the same thing. If you specify things in embed like controls equals console, now you've got the controls. Maybe there's UI, play, pause, stop, that kind of stuff. So another way that people put audio on the web back then, you would have an entirely Flash-based UI for playing audio, again, doing this object embed stuff. Maybe you throw a Java applet in the page because Java also can write to the hardware. And then sometimes you just have an external application that's linked via special URL. So Real Media back in 2000 was a popular application for playing web TV content. The idea then was that the web and the internet was this separate thing. TV and radio were still going strong, and so you would listen to radio on the internet as opposed in a separate application as opposed to having it embedded in the page. So we're going to come back now and we'll talk about, that's kind of old stuff. Where are we sitting at now? So presently we've got some remnants of the past. We've got Flash-based audio controls, so again, widget in the page that takes care of everything. We're starting to see HTML5 audio elements either rendered with HTML with an invisible player in the background, or sometimes the player itself, which kind of looks like QuickTime. And optionally, a Flash fallback to do HTML5-like things in the browsers that can't play them. And then some sites and games and things are just using straight-up HTML5 audio, and they're just playing MP3 or OGG. And I assume everybody here understands that no one browser, or no one format is common across all browsers right now. Unfortunately, it's kind of a, in Canada, we say it's a gong show, which is kind of a disaster. It means it's not going to be an easy thing to deal with. So let's get into the fun stuff, or stuff that drives me crazy sometimes. So iOS specifically, Stephen talks about touch interfaces and things. I'm going to tell you about audio. What I've discovered, you can only play one sound at a time. So this is a limitation that Apple has put out there, I think, to prevent, it might be because hardware has to decode the audio. It might be that right now they just said, look, we don't want to have the problem of software trying to play multiple sounds at once, so we're going to lock it down to one at a time. If you're listening on the iPod, you have to then push play in the browser to start the sound. So they also block autoplay for the same reason. If you load up a web page, you don't want to lose your MP3 you're listening to. So you have to tap or click to start audio on iOS. And then finally, because it's a mobile device, you also have, I think, limited caching. So what I've found is people would write in saying they are seeing multiple requests across different pages within a single session requesting the same content that a device has already downloaded. So we'll see where this stuff goes in the future. But in general, there are a lot of quirks with HTML5 audio. It's not sort of the panacea that some people make it out to be. Ironically, if you download Safari, which is the default, it just says Safari for Windows, you don't get Safari plus QuickTime, and then you don't get HTML5 audio and video support. So it's sort of funny because QuickTime is a component that's packaged with Safari, and that's how they get the audio and video support in there. So in some ways, we're really looking at plugins. They're just kind of a different kind of plugin. Right? Another funny thing is that Windows Server might have IE9 installed. It's the newest operating system. But if it doesn't have the desktop experience component, then there's no HTML5 audio again. So you cannot also assume, oh, IE9, it must have this object. So you're best to do object detection, type of audio not equal null, that sort of thing. And oddly, I have not seen any evidence of panning. So the idea that I want to take a stereo channel, split it between left and right, it's like it's not in there. I don't know what to tell you. Some more general stuff. The audio API for figuring out what kind of content you can play is this wacky can play type method. And I've said this before, it's the most uncomputer-like response I've ever seen from an API. You say audio/MP3, and the standard response is either probably, maybe, or blank. It used to be no, but they changed it to be blank, so it would return falsy, which kind of kills me. So the more specific you are, if you also say audio MP3 codecs equals MPEG, blah, 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 you're more likely to get a probably response as opposed to a maybe response. So it's sort of this black box of you don't know what the hell the browser is going to tell you. So you have to be as specific as you can when specifying that MIME type to get the best certainty about whether support is present. Then, of course, all browsers are mixed in their support, so you pretty much have to test for everything. Some browsers also may have limitations on the number of objects that can be in existence or playing simultaneously. So 32 might be a magic number to watch out for if you're trying to load and play a lot of sound simultaneously. Another interesting thing to consider is that you can also make range requests and partials. So it's kind of like you're on YouTube. You can instantly skip halfway into a video. You don't have to load sequentially to be able to seek to a point. Drop the connection, pick up from 50% of the way, and go from there. So that kind of de-emphasizes the traditional load progress we're used to, where you have a 10 meg file, you're 3 megs of the way in, you know you've got 7 left. This kind of throws that out because it's not sequential anymore. Safari audio was pretty borked for a while there. That's a technical term. Between 10.6.3 and 10.6.7, Snow Leopard, and it was just this intermittent load play failure where, for whatever reason, sometimes audio just wouldn't play. It would go and it would load and it would start and then it would say stalled. So who the hell knows what happened? It seemed like a regression, something underlying QuickTime, between QuickTime and the OS. Eventually they fixed it, line, it's not a problem. More recently, and this is what bit the cut the rope game, which I'll mention in a bit, Chrome less than 18, it might have been between 16 and 18, would occasionally have a global audio crash where you would create a bunch of sound objects, play them, and then eventually all audio playback in the browser would just completely stop. You had to quit and restart the browser to get audio back. So there's a website that a couple of guys from SoundCloud and other startups have put together, I think, called areweplayingyet.org. And it's sort of a test suite that'll go through and run a bunch of different things like, let's load 32 objects at once, let's play a bunch of sounds, let's reassign source, let's see what ways your browser behaves when we do certain things with objects, as a way to test the different kind of browser behavior, see how they do. A couple other things. When you create an audio object, kind of like creating an image, you might say new image, not pass any parameters, and then assign a source later. This should work, except that sometimes in WebKit decides to load null as a URL. And then, so I would say, okay, then don't pass null, just do new audio like I should. But then Opera 964 barfs with wrong arguments. So you basically have to branch your code to if this browser, do this, else that. Another thing is unloading, destroying connections, closing connections, and releasing RAM. Mozilla have said if you set the source of an audio object to null, or rather an empty string, it will destroy the internal decoder, close the connection, release memory. I'm not sure what other browsers do. So this stuff is important. If you're creating and loading a lot of sound objects, you've got to consider that stuff. So the point, if I were here selling something, my point would be you should use Sound Manager too, because I've been working on it for 7+ years and it's good, or at least I think it's good. So what I'm trying to help people do is to play HTML5 audio while also having support, fallback support for the older browsers that don't do it. And so this API abstracts that stuff so that you can just say, create sound, you have an ID, a URL, and then you can call methods like play, stop, pause, whatever on that object. And it will use Flash if it needs to behind the scenes, it'll use HTML5 if it's there, and it can seamlessly branch between the two depending on what kind of file you want to play. So can you use this stuff today? And I would say yes, but it's a bit of a minefield, so you just have to step carefully. So due to the bugs that I've already mentioned, Chrome and the other stuff, the issues with HTML5 that exist, we're still finding new things. New issues are constantly being reported. By default, my library prefers Flash for MP3 and MP4 formats, even if they're supported by HTML5, just because it's kind of risky. So there was a recent game ported to HTML called Cut the Rope. I think it was a Microsoft-sponsored thing, and it was 100% HTML5 audio, interestingly only in IE9, because IE9 actually had reasonable HTML5 playback support. Other browsers, they kept finding bugs, so they had to roll back. They were using my stuff and going with Flash for the playback. And they got a bit of flack from the developer community. Well, why does this game have Flash in it? And they said, well, we just really want this to work across the widest number of browsers and devices. It's a tough call, but this is kind of the state we're in. So general concerns. What are the other things with audio that kind of trip us up from time to time? So performance and sync, timing obviously are very important to things like gaming. So you're firing a gun, there's a ball bouncing off a wall. It's very important that the frame syncs to the sound. And right now, there's a lot of varied performance in terms of latency, delays, the time when JS makes the call to when the sound is actually heard through the speakers. And I think this can vary by browser and by OS. Another issue is looping. So you have a game loop, background music that's playing, and you'd like it to be seamless so that there's no, you don't have to cut a super huge file. You can just have a short loop and have it go end to end. Looping has proven to be very difficult, even in Flash, which is supposed to do a good job of that stuff. So it's going to be interesting to see where that goes. So this is just native audio objects that I've been talking about. Why, what if we had something below that? So since you can create an audio object, we have data URIs. You know about those because of sprites. We can also pass base64 audio data directly to an audio object, load it, play it from there. Now, this is kind of an interesting hack, but realistically, it's only really good for generating, say, 440 Hz A-tone sine wave of fixed length. This is not really going to be the kind of thing for dynamic sound generation, but I'm going to get into that. So the next thing is the lower level audio data APIs. So Mozilla and WebKit now are both working on APIs that allow effectively Canvas-like read and write access for audio, and it looks great. So the benefit here is that then people who are great with creating data on the fly can now do the sort of things that traditional C programmers would do, and DSP type folks who are able to work with audio at a low level and generate signals and do processing and effects and all that kind of stuff. And so what happens when you give developers the data, like with Canvas, you see these beautiful visualizations. When you allow those same people to then take audio data and do I/O and combine this with Canvas, you get some pretty interesting and shiny visualizations. So there's two different kind of APIs in the works, and the W3C is now sort of saying, okay, let's try to normalize this stuff. They have, I think, a working group and are now working on this audio processing API. So we'll see what happens with that. Right now, there's sort of two separate things. People are working on their own libraries to normalize them. I've blabbed on enough. Let's show some fun stuff. So I'm going to show audio data API and then web audio API, and then I'll get into some other things. So quickly, this is Flight of the Navigator. So this came out, it was last year. What they're showing here is Canvas. I'm going to skip the Never mind the music, but the idea is this should be a lot faster, actually, but disregard. What you're seeing is city rendering. This is all live, and the data is being pulled from audio, and then, of course, making this city kind of responsive and reactive, which I think is one of the most interesting things when you get a hold of data. So when you're able to combine music and the information behind it and then apply it to a landscape, so the whole thing kind of pulses and animates with the data behind the music, basically just frequency and spectrum analysis. That produces some pretty interesting stuff. And this is just, I mean, this is a year or more old. This is old now. The stuff that's coming up is going to be really interesting. So this is an idea of just what happens when you give people the data behind audio, just in terms of reading. Okay. So on the other hand, we also have some interesting, this is in Chrome now. So I'm going to load this example. So now what you're seeing is, again, some really just interesting canvas rendering. We're not getting a fantastic frame rate here, but again, the idea is just taking these bits of audio, samples of data, and then making something like what you might have seen in Winamp, 15 years ago. But now you're starting to see this right in the browser. So it's like, I've seen the future and it's in a browser. I've seen the past and it's going to be in the future and it's going to be in a web browser again. So you're seeing a lot of these things that have been done in the past now being done in browsers and sort of brought to the masses again. This thing gets noisy and then the effects are all over the place, but you get the idea. Really well done. So Google themselves have a website that has a bunch of features showing the various types of data visualization stuff, and then Mozilla have their own as well. Those are just two of the ones that I thought were particularly interesting. So another thing with data, these guys, OFM Labs, have gone through and said, okay, we can read raw data, we can process it, we can feed it to the sound card. Let's decode MP3 in JavaScript. Why not? Why wouldn't a guy? So here we are, we're loading and playing. All right, I lost my connection perhaps. But you get the idea, right? So pull the data, translate, and then output. So once you're able to read write, you can do pretty much anything. Remix on the fly, beat matching, looping, all that stuff becomes possible. Visualization, again, trivial. Really interesting stuff. So what this thing, in theory, could mean is, well, browser, the format support doesn't matter. We could just read it in JS and convert it to something else, and there you go. It's like the emulator argument, right? Okay, so some stuff I built. I'm going to pray to the demo gods and just hope this works. So bear with me. So the Wheels of Steel was an experiment that I started earlier last year. And I'm just going to try really quickly to play something and mix something. So bear with me. This is all HTML. That's the sound that I don't want to hear, but let's go with it anyways. So I might have to do the video of this that I have. But the idea was I wanted to make a turntable interface in HTML using transforms to, animate, move everything around. In the background, there's Flash doing the audio processing. These days, the low-level APIs I was just talking about can pretty much do this stuff natively. So pitch bending, all that kind of stuff is possible. And I'm not I don't do DSP type math, so it's going to sound a little chunky here. But I'll try to explain what I'm doing. So I'm going to set a couple of breakpoints. Put a piece of tape on the record, right? So the idea is that you capture a point on the record. Right? So this is going to be really hard to do, I think, with this. Okay, I'm just going to roll the video on this one, because it'll look like I do it way better in the video. But the idea is I was going to beat match these two things, right? And then, so let me just get this going because it'll look way cooler. The echo really throws you off. If you've ever been a DJ, you understand it's important to have a monitor right here with your source when you're trying to mix, because otherwise you get the echo and it throws you right off. So let me just roll this quickly here. So I'm going to skip in. You've already seen some of this. Scratch the record. Point, tape, so I can bookmark that spot. Now I'm going to beat juggle a little bit. So So now you've got a little sampler, and you can scratch the record. Second record. Pitch bend, speed it up. Okay, now we're on sync. One channel. So I've started this other one to keep that instrumental loop going. Now I'm going to grab this one, let this play out, the guy will start singing. In a moment.
Dinner at 8, that sounds fine. I suppose it means you'll turn up around 9. Bought a bunch of flowers just for her. She says the burden's on the receiver. I opened the door and you walked in. I sent a wild jasmine. The room seemed to freeze in time. My regular table will be just fine. Radiant and elegant you might be, but your concentration is so golightly. Both of your eyes like the moon. You really think you own the room.
Okay, that's probably good enough. You get the idea. Wheelsofsteel.net, you can go check it out there. It's on GitHub. I had a lot of fun making this. This music also is not, this stuff is commercial, so it's not on the site, but there's stuff from SoundCloud and the Beastie Boys' latest album that's all legit, and you can go and mess around with it there. I recommend Safari for our hardware acceleration reasons because this stuff is not the most efficient and it's a little heavy. So one other thing, and then you can go. And I want to say thank you, too, to Yahoo for hosting the event and just all the guys who helped, Alan and everyone, to get the sound set up and working, because without sound, this wouldn't have been a very fun demo. So this thing that I started building, I don't know, a month or so ago, was a remake of an old Atari game, which was then remade the next year on the Commodore 64. And I used to play it as a kid. So what I might try to do is see if I can beat a level. Now this is kind of old school. Oh yeah, yeah. The Commodore, there's a 5-second delay too, because you know it's running off tape. So this isn't finished yet, so bear with me. So I took the original sounds, it's all 8-bit. This is a 8-bit kind of background tile going on here. So I'm just going to get into the game. So I was trying to make something in HTML, just not to do it in Canvas, just to see if I could make something that would still be kind of fast. So this thing is, it's 1982, so of course it's a space game. Of course you're a little guy with a ship, and you fly around and you shoot stuff. Okay. You know what, Alan, I think the video capture is really slowing this down, so I'm going to stop this now. Let's just see if this, this thing is supposed to run at around 40 frames a second within Safari. So the idea is you fly around this little world, you shoot the bases, you take out the bad guys. Working on collision detection, that turned out to be really hard. So I had to draw all these little things and then try not to, basically do pixel level detection and try to keep the game fast. And I think I've got too much stuff running on this computer right now. So it's not very smooth. But the whole game is a map that's defined in JS. The pulsing that you're seeing going on is a single CSS class name change up top, which then changes the background position on approximately 570 div elements or something like that. So the part of my test here was to try to make something that would remain fast, despite that I was doing it in quite an old school way. And so far, I think because of hardware acceleration of Safari, it's actually been quite fast. So I don't know if you can see it here, but there's right now 700, and I made a little profiler, 88 div elements underneath the world container. There are 554 blocks, which are these base things, and then the walls and the turrets, which make up the bases. So some of the stuff I was trying to do while performance profiling on this thing was, well, what if I turn all the sprites off? So does that make it any faster? No more background images, and I can just fly around the world. What if I take out the turret gunfire, right? Does my frame rate go up? So I was trying to really see, oh, you know, Firefox gets slower when the world scrolls, so maybe I can use the 2D translate stuff, translate X and Y to make it faster. What I'm actually doing in this case is scrolling the whole world by scrolling the window. So I'm using scroll 2. And in most cases, it's actually pretty fast. But I think maybe I can show, if you guys want to see, I can show you offline. It normally runs at about 40 frames a second. And it was a fun little performance challenge. That is everything. And of course, this is in a web browser too.